Okay, so before we get to today's game, I need to explain something about how I select games for ADG. Now, if it's not a game I've played before, then I don't preview the game ahead of time before selecting it, and typically go in completely blind. Let's say for looking up basic descriptive details and screenshots. So when I selected today's Ancient DOS game, Muppet Adventure, Chaos at the Carnival, I did so because it looked like it'd be a fun little program to insert into Edutainment Month, even though it isn't really an educational game. It's more instead billed as a collection of mini-games intended for younger audiences. Plus it has the Muppets license going for it. I mean, what could possibly go wrong with this thing? Famous last words, because this thing is broken. I mean, really broken. It is so broken that I was questioning whether it was even being emulated properly, and asked a friend to investigate it on real period-correct hardware, and yeah, it's even broken on real hardware. On top of the numerous soft locks and glitches, the game's also very poorly designed, the audio isn't done very well. I mean, the character artwork is fine, but everything else looks slapped together. It's like nobody cared, nobody tested it, and I'm left wondering how a fully licensed game would even ever get released in this state. Although, really, I think the answer to that is pretty simple. As I've mentioned in the past, virtually no developer ever intends to make a bad game, but publisher decisions, deadlines, and other considerations can end up pushing a game out the door before it's ready, and I'm pretty sure that's what happened here. This game feels like a first draft, abandoned before it could be properly matured into a fully functional and fun product, and launched without proper testing either to meet a deadline and or divert manpower to other more lucrative projects. So to that end, I'm going to be going over each of the minigames in here and discussing what could have been done differently to make them better. Muppet Adventure, Chaos at the Carnival was developed by a little-known software developer primarily operating in the late 80s known as Micromosaics, and was published by High Tech Expressions in 1989. It's a 1 to 2 player minigame collection featuring CGA 320x200 4-color graphics and PC speaker sound, and as for its current release date, it's still commercial and somewhat annoying to acquire. There are a few different ports of the game, each of which shares the same plot but have different minigames on offer, with the NES release being the most common by far and also the least expensive. But truth be told, the prices are just erratic at best. I came across fully boxed copies for sale for as little as $20 and as much as $125, but the actual final sale prices indicate that most people looking to collect this aren't spending any more than $25, unless the copy's factory sealed, unless if you're just getting the media and not the box and manual as well. So that's about the most you should expect to spend if you're trying to add this to your collection. So there's actually a plot to this game. Miss Piggy's been captured by the evil Dr. Grump, and it's up to Kermit the Frog and his friends to clear the attractions of the Doctor's deadly carnival in order to confront his most diabolical creation, the Grumposaurus, and to rescue Miss Piggy. Yeah, and that's all there is for the plot. When you first boot the game, it also asks if 1 or 2 people are playing, although because of how the game works, it's almost pointless to play this in 2-player mode, as we're going to see in a moment. Once you get into the game, you can select from 5 different attractions: Bumper Cars, the Fun House, the Tunnel of Love, Duck Hunt, and the Space Ride. Also, just for sake of fairness, I will now indicate how many different softlocks I ran into with each of these minigames. Now, this isn't counting a general softlock that randomly occurs every time you clear or fail an attraction. Basically, every time you win or lose, it's a roll of the dice if the game will continue as intended or just freeze solid. I'm going to go in order of least problematic to most problematic, and thus we start off with the Tunnel of Love. This is probably the most stable and reliable of all 5 of the standard minigames, though I should quickly point out that before you begin each minigame, you get to choose which Muppet to control out of 6 selections: Scooter, Animal, Ralph, Fozzie, Kermit, and Gonzo, and this sometimes makes a difference with how a game plays out. Here in the Tunnel of Love, for instance, each Muppet can move their boat at different speeds. Although one major issue with this quote-unquote Tunnel of Love right from the get-go is that it's loaded with trash. Well, that and hippos and alligators, but the point is that a tunnel filled with nasty things does not conjure up thoughts of love. Well, in any case, the goal is to dodge everything for 60 seconds, and if you can do that, you win. Oh, there's Miss Piggy. Maybe we can... So, Yeah, something else I need to point out right away is that in most of the minigames, Miss Piggy can show up as an obstacle that needs to be avoided. Because that makes a lot of sense, having to dodge the character you're trying to save from the clutches of evil. Why is this even a feature? Anyways, your boat's able to sustain up to 4 hits without issue, but if you take a 5th hit before you get to the end, it's game over. And I should point out too that if you lose a minigame, you start the entire sequence of minigames all over again, which kind of incentivizes playing them in order of worst to best, aka the opposite order that I'm demonstrating them in. Then when you finally get to the end, you have the finish line, which causes damage if you hit it. Oh wait, it didn't actually count, it just looked like it did. Well, at least I didn't completely screw that up. But yeah, the main design problem with this minigame, and in fact with most of the minigames on offer, is that the character sprites are too large. I mean, I get why they would do that, so that the characters could be better defined and more recognizable, but it makes a lot of these minigames feel claustrophobic. Also, this should not have been called the Tunnel of Love. Something more akin to River Rapids would have been more appropriate. Heck, that's what they went with in the NES version of the game. Next, we have Duck Hunt. And this minigame's weird for a few reasons. The first is that it has its own executable dedicated to it outside of the main program. I'm guessing it was done this way in order for the game to function under more restrictive memory and system requirements, but for a 1989 game, it might have been a bit excessive, especially since this switching between executables might be part of the reason behind some of the soft locks. Another weird thing about the Duck Hunt minigame is that it actually plays like one of those old LCD handheld games, like the ones Tiger Electronics pumped out in massive quantities. The ducks or the tomatoes you throw all have fixed positions and graphics for each of those positions. Also, the only limit on throwing tomatoes is 1 per horizontal line, so you can sweep back and forth throwing bushels upon bushels of tomatoes without any repercussions. In fact, you kind of have to, since you're expected to splat tomatoes against 100 ducks to clear this minigame. If you let just 10 get past, then you fail it, and softlock the game. Yeah, this minigame is so easy that no one tested to make sure you could actually fail it properly. Go figure. Suffice to say, to actually add some skill to this, they should have toned down the total number of ducks to hunt, say 20, and added a limit on how many tomatoes you could throw in total. Those 2 simple changes would have made this minigame a lot more fun. Next up we have bumper cars. This already feels wrong. For starters, the goal of this minigame is to complete laps around an incredibly simple race course where the finish line isn't clearly marked until the last lap. I mean, seriously, when have you ever seen bumper cars used in a racing format? I mean, outside of Japan, where that's actually the de facto standard. Actually, that's the least of this minigame's worries, as even though it plays better than most of the minigames, it's also the most broken. For starters, the way impacts work shift to the position of the bumper cars without doing proper collision checking. Now, most of the time this isn't an issue, but if you're hitting other cars while right at the line which counts the lap, you can end up repeating the lap count, which works in your favor sometimes, but you can also end up causing it to go backwards, forcing you to complete even more laps to win. However, you'll notice various objects spawn in at random as well, including Miss Piggy and her own bumper car. Well, if Miss Piggy happens to spawn too close to your player, it completely glitches out the collision detection, generates an error message, and the game will freeze. And if that's not enough, if you actually win the minigame, there's a small chance that at the end of the victory lap your Muppet takes automatically, the game will start making a buzzing noise and completely lock up that way. In any case, there's a couple different ways this could have been made better. The first would have been to make a huge field to bounce around in and have items you have to collect for points, with the goal being to get more points than your opponent. Or another trick, while keeping the racing theme, would have been to just make a straight track that fake scrolls to the side while throwing obstacles at you that you might have to bounce off of or whatever. However, I know why they didn't do either of these things, and the reason is actually something I haven't brought up yet. The controls. For both the Tunnel of Love and Duck Hunt, the controls haven't been a big issue. In fact, quite the contrary. In those 2 minigames, the controls are responsive and function as they should. Though I should point out that in the Tunnel of Love, you're limited to straight up, straight down, and straight left or right, no diagonals. However, for the rest of the program, the controls have problems. Here in the bumper cars, you kind of need to hold down arrow keys to move your vehicle, but the controls are all based on the standard BIOS keyboard handler, which means keys take a split second to start repeating, which can make controlling your bumper car feel extremely unresponsive. Plus, pressing other keys briefly can interrupt the keys that you intend to hold down. But again, this minigame's so simple that even the bad controls aren't going to stop you from winning, just soft locks. Next up, we have the Funhouse. This minigame is 100% luck. You basically have a random maze you need to go through while avoiding dogs. If you get bitten by the dogs 4 times, you lose. What makes this tricky is that the maze is not only split across 4 separate screens, the controls not only have a delay to them, the dogs not only have a surprisingly high level of intelligence, but sometimes the maze is generated in a way that's impossible to clear. Not because the path through the maze isn't generated properly, but because there's 3 characters you can find on the maze whom, when touched, will teleport you into a random spot. They can also be placed in exactly the wrong spot, right in the way of the path to escape. And when that happens, it means you have to constantly touch these characters in the hope that you'll be teleported into a spot that'll get you out of the maze. Also, occasionally when you load up this minigame, it'll soft lock on the starting screen. My guess here, judging by how it's soft locking, is that the random maze generator isn't perfect and it's running into an infinite loop. In any case, this minigame would have been a zillion times better if, instead of being chased by dogs, they made it a puzzle of some kind, or made the sprites half as big so that you could see more of what you were doing and not fall victim to the screen borders masking your imminent doom. Also, the random generation is pretty half-baked, with there being no actual horizontal walls, only vertical walls and vertical openings being randomly generated, which kind of makes me wonder how they would even be able to screw that up. Also, there's a typo when you clear this minigame, because no untested game is complete without a "yourer" or some such equivalent. And lastly, of the standard minigames, we have the Space Ride. Oh boy, this minigame is incredible. And by incredible, I mean an incredible failure. So the way this works is that the space station is moving up and down, and you have to maneuver your space shape into the right spot and dock it into its appropriate slot. Well, it sounds simple, and if the game was playing at a frame rate of more than 8, maybe it would be, but there are so many things going wrong here, I don't even know where to begin. For starters, the controls are just insane. Your character can only move into 3 positions: engine facing left, engine facing right, or engine facing down. You cannot point the engine upward at any point in time. Secondly, you don't use the up or down arrows. The left arrow key rotates you so the engine is facing more to the left, and the right arrow key rotates you so the engine is facing more to the right. A spacebar fires the engine, which pushes you in the opposite direction it's facing in. So if the engine is facing left, you get pushed to the right. Furthermore, the amount of thrust you get when you have no lateral movement doubles, making it extraordinarily difficult to line yourself up horizontally, to say nothing about vertical orientation. Plus, the accuracy for getting the docking to work is almost pixel perfect. Now, there's a few pixels of leeway, but only to the right and none to the left. And it's not even that much, and you can still end up missing the vertical detection just because of your own position versus the station's movement. On top of all of this, you have comets to dodge, which have an extended black outline around them that you can't see against the background that counts towards collisions. So if you get even just slightly close to one of them, you will get hit, and you will instantly lose the minigame. Yeah, one hit and you're starting the entire sequence of minigames all over again. These comets are incredibly difficult to dodge too, and in fact, because their direction and speed are random, as is your starting location, it's very possible for the game to begin and then in just 2 seconds, you're dead, with no recourse and no way to have prevented it. And then on top of all of that, there's a freaking time limit, and it's not even shown on screen. If you run out of time, the space station will slowly ascend into orbit, leaving you to spin out and burn up in the atmosphere. This minigame is pure evil. So, how would I have made this minigame better? That's simple. I'd have changed it entirely. We're talking about something called a space ride, right? Well, in keeping with the theme of different shapes for different characters, why not make it so that you're just flying through space and have to slip through various force fields that have different shapes on them by making sure you pilot through the appropriate holes, with the occasional obstacle to dodge. Also, a freaking life bar of some kind, because one-hit deaths which force you to play all the other minigames all over again is not acceptable. In any case, if you do manage to clear all 5 standard minigames, you get one final minigame to play, the battle against the Grumposaurus, with the goal being to achieve a certain number of tickles with a giant feather to win. Now, how many tickles does it take? I don't have a freaking clue, because guess what? All the minigames up to now had either OK controls, delayed controls, or difficult controls, but this is the one and only minigame in the entire set with broken controls. Basically, you have to press the arrow keys to change which direction you're walking in, and can press spacebar to jump, but the game's buffering your keystrokes and only checks the next one for every frame where you're walking on the ground. This means if you accidentally hold the spacebar for more than an instant, you're going to buffer about 10 to 20 jumps or so and will run the timer out completely out of your control as Kermit just jumps infinitely. Furthermore, the actual collision point to score a tickle against the Grumposaurus is, once again, almost pixel perfect. I was never able to get it down exactly. I mean, there's spikes falling and bats flying around, and you only have 1 minute to do this. Also, because all the hazards are randomly generated, there's a chance they'll end up taking over the corner Kermit spawns in, and you'll end up respawning and instantly dying over and over and over again, burning even more time off the clock. Although to be fair, this minigame is designed perfectly fine. It just needs to have its controls fixed, not respawn you when you're going to instantly die, make it possible to stop walking, and enlarge the collision area to score a tickle, and then you would end up with a viable minigame. Though, I should point out that the game can enter a glitch state where anytime you lose a minigame, you'll always end up going to the final minigame, which I don't even know how that kind of logic even ends up working at all. Plus on top of that, if you play the final minigame at any point in time, all other minigames will begin to suffer graphical flickering of some kind, some more severe than others, and this flickering persists until you shut the game down and boot it up again. Overall, Muppet Adventure Chaos at the Carnival is a broken mess of a game that should never have seen the light of day in this state, and yet here we are. A lot more testing and a lot more dev work was needed to get this into a state where it would be acceptable to play, but in its current state it's just too loaded with bugs and has too many shortcomings which make it either not fun to play or absolutely annoying to attempt to complete. The multiplayer component is a throwaway too, since all it does is alternate between 2 players who are both going through the game as though they were playing it solo, and the idea is to see if either player can win the game, since if one player loses a minigame, they're out until the other player loses, and then both players simply start over. Also, one thing I find extremely curious about this game is the lack of EGA support. For a fully boxed and licensed DOS game released in 1989, that makes no sense whatsoever and further cements the idea that this was rushed out the door before it was done. In short, the only reason there is to buy this game nowadays is for sake of collecting, because as a game, it's just not worth playing, not even for a little. However, if you do just have to play it for yourself, then you need to set a fixed cycles count in DOSBox, as some aspects of the program are speed sensitive, but not others. I recommend any setting between 1000 and 2000 cycles. Any slower, and many aspects of the game will play even worse or flicker badly, and any faster, and certain things will be moving far too fast. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next Saturday will be a filler video, and I have a couple ideas I'm deciding between as a topic, so if you're curious to hear my thoughts on some interesting gaming topics, then be sure to stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small set of you guys.